Well, I want to talk about online gambling now, a multi-billion-dollar business around the world. But what many people might not know is that it's technically illegal down in the U.S. We've got Jack Kapitsa on the line to talk about online gambling and some interesting developments that have happened, especially with a little country in the Caribbean called Antigua. Thanks for joining us, Jack.
Thank you, Mike.
So what's all the hubbub about Antigua?
Well, Antigua, tiny little Caribbean nation, guess what their biggest industry was? Well, tourism, right?
Yes.
Well, they had a couple of hurricanes back in the 1990s, and tourism kind of took a nosedive. And being very forward-looking people, they decided that they're going to do online business to supplement the country's economy. So they turned to gambling, and they have some 30-odd gambling casinos, online gambling casinos in Antigua, and they were making about $1 billion a year.
$1 billion.
$1 billion a year, which is not a bad business, I guess.
No, I take it.
And what happened, of course, is the Americans took one look at this money and said, hey, wait a second, this is immoral, and we don't want it to happen, so therefore we're going to ban all online gambling. It's typical, you know, the way it could be sold to Americans, right? It's immoral, right?
Yes.
It's against God's law and all that other kind of stuff.
Because they're not doing it in Las Vegas.
Well, exactly. That's the whole point. You see, what happened is that the World Trade Organization, to which the Antiguans appealed, actually ruled against the Americans in March and said they're going to have to allow online gambling, and Antigua has now decided, what the big news is, that they've decided to ask all sorts of other countries in the world that have been affected similarly by the ban to join with them and demand compensation from the United States.
Well, it's kind of like a class action suit type thing?
Exactly, yeah. I mean, what happened is that the Antiguans' income from the casinos dropped from $1 billion a year to $130 million, which is just a little bit more than 1/10 of what it used to be, and thanks very much to the Americans. Of course, there's all sorts of British gambling casinos, and the British are big gamblers and have been for a long time. And they too have been suffering mightily about this. I don't have any figures for them, though. But there are several other countries that have had online casinos that have been affected seriously by this. Now, what the World Trade Organization did is they created a little bit of a Solomonic decision. They said the Americans have the right to control gambling within its own borders, but whatever decision they make is going to have to apply both to their internal national networks and gambling as it applies to the rest of the world. So if they're going to ban online gambling from Antigua, they're going to have to ban online gambling in the States. And you know what kind of a big business it is in the States, online gambling with horse racing, dog racing, and so on. So the Americans, of course, have got to, I love this part, they've come up with a typically American response. Well, we never specifically agreed to this online gambling rule when we signed the General Agreement on Trade Services back in 1994, which is before the web came on. And so therefore, this whole complaint has been totally invalid, and now we're going to legally rethink our position to include this business of online gambling. And since we're going to rethink the rules, the Antiguan case no longer applies. So therefore, they're not going to pay them.
Of course. I just find that amazing how they bulldoze their way through these trade disputes.
I know, it's astonishing law. It makes great television, I think, but lousy law, and certainly even lousier diplomacy.
But do you see this getting resolved anytime soon? I mean, this could drag out for years.
It could, of course. It'll take the World Trade Organization a while to sort this whole thing out. I mean, they could slap all sorts of sanctions they want against the Americans. I doubt the Americans will ever pay up because it's not in the Americans' character to do so. As we have learned with the software trade dispute, we actually had to give up an awful lot. The Americans will, of course, have to try to find the money if they do, or they'll come up with another legal recourse to get out of paying for it. I mean, they take the same position, pardon me for sounding a bit of an American basher at this point, but they're behaving with the World Trade Organization the same way they do with the United Nations. You know, hey, it's a great organization for keeping everybody in line, but since we're the biggest guy here, we don't have to play by those rules. And like with the United Nations, no other nation is going to tell us what to do or what laws to accept. Therefore, the United Nations can't possibly do anything for us.
Well, I certainly find it a fascinating story, and I want to thank you for joining us today, Jack. I'll let you get back to your online poker.
Thanks, Mike.
That was Jack Kapitsa from the Globe and Mail. You can check out more of his articles and blogging at globetechnology.com.